This video is going to be my full review of the Giant TCX. I've done a first look video, and by now I would have uploaded my video on cyclocross versus gravel bikes. I'm not really going to rehash fully why I got this bike, but I'll just summarize it and say I needed a bike for a few cyclocross races that still exist. And then I just wanted to try it on gravel. I've had a few Giant TCXs over the years, but it's been several years since I've had one, and I wanted to try it as a gravel bike, and finally I needed a bike for my trainer, but that's way down the list because I don't do a lot of indoor training, but I needed a bike set up for that. So the Giant TCX has been in my fleet for almost 3 months now, and I've gotten a lot of riding on it. I've done gravel rides up in the mountains, I've done cyclocross race, or 2 of them on this bike, and then I've done a lot of gravel riding around here, just 1-hour rides, 3 or 4 hour events. So it's gotten a wide variety of uses, and I want to talk about kind of my thoughts on it. So as I typically do, I'm just going to show the bike up close and talk about a few components. But I will say that the thing that I appreciate about this particular bike is the combination of comfort, stability, and agility. It's a carbon frame, carbon fork, and Giant have done a phenomenal job on this bike building up the carbon, so it's very responsive, but yet it's not harsh, and it's also not unstable. I've ridden this bike on single track, and I actually really like riding this bike on single track. The stiffer front end, the agility of the bike make it a really nice riding bike on single track. But let's take a close-up look at the bike. I'm just going to talk about a few components and what I think after 3 months of a wide variety of use on this bike. In no particular order, I'll start with the drivetrain. This bike has an 11-speed rear cassette. So by now, 1x GRX and a 12-speed option is available, but Giant chose to go with the 11-speed. Probably a bit of a cost-saving measure. This bike's only $3,000, which for what you get, the quality of the carbon and the components is a really good price. But you know, 11 versus 12, a little bit of a cost savings, but it wasn't a big deal for me. This cassette is actually a 11 to 40, which is a bit tighter than some 1x systems that you'll see on a gravel bike. But that tighter cassette really allows you to fine-tune your gearing when you're on a flatter road. On trails, cyclocross race, and hilly terrain, you don't really notice that, but when you're on a flat road and you really need to get the right gear, having that tighter cassette is really nice. So I really like the 1x system. This bike does have a chain keeper, which for the most part is good. In a cyclocross race that I did, I dropped the chain and it took me a while to get it back on. I have a feeling that would have happened no matter what, because I think I got a stick or something between the chain and the cassette, and it just pried the chain off because I was pretty cross-chained. I was in a gear probably like up here because I was driving through some really thick mud, and because the chain was just pushed over and I got something in there, it came off. That's where chain keepers are not good, because it's hard to get a chain back on sometimes. So that's a bit of a story. If you want to watch that video, I'll link it in the description below. But the cyclocross race that I did, I dropped the chain, still did okay in the race, but it did take me a while to get the chain back on. I really like this GRX system. I've used GRX for quite a while now. I like the clutch. I don't always run the clutch because it's a little bit harder to shift. So sometimes I'll leave it off in that position, and then sometimes I'll just put it back on when I'm on bumpy roads, or especially in a cyclocross race or on single track. You want to leave that on. But if you're riding a little bit smoother gravel roads, you can leave it off, and it just makes your shifting a little bit easier. The only thing that I've changed on this bike is the tires. And I really love the fact that the Giant TCX, you can put in some wider tires. So in the back, you've got some decent clearance, not huge. So these are 40s. You could probably go up to 45. I think Giant says you can go up to 45 in the front. You could definitely go up to 45. So that's what makes the Giant TCX such a versatile bike, is the fact that you can put bigger tires for riding gravel, put your cross race tires back on, and you know, you got a versatile bike. So this particular bike has a bar that does not have much of a flare, if any. In fact, I would say that's a 0 flare. And so your hands are going to be closer together on the drops, a little bit better for racing. You're a little bit more aerodynamic. Flares are personal preference. I like a flare on a gravel bike, but riding this on some long gravel rides, I really didn't feel like I needed a flare because a lot of times I ride in the hoods. In fact, I probably ride on the hoods up there probably 95% of the time. I only get in the drops every once in a while. I'll just go ahead and say, I've mentioned it before, but the paint job on this bike is just, it's killer. It's got this iridescent color that kind of looks different depending on the lighting. And I love just the glossy finish that Giant puts on their frames. I'm not a fan of flat paint jobs. And so I like this glossy paint job. I also like the fact that it's easier to clean. So when you get done with a cyclocross race and your bike's just coated in mud, it just washes off easier than like a flat paint job. So not only is the color cool, but I also really like the finish. One thing that I want to mention about the drivetrain that I forgot to mention when I was talking about the cassette, the shifting on this bike has been very spot on, except for there's one gear right in the middle where I've gotten some hesitation. Not every time, but there are some times where I'll shift into an easier gear, so bigger cog at the back, and it just hesitates. And it's right in the middle. It's only one gear, but I'd say for the most part, the shifting has been great on this bike. Braking on this bike has also been very good with the GRX brakes. I really love Shimano hydraulic brakes. Despite the 140 rotor in the back, it's got pretty powerful brakes. The front is a 160 rotor. I would say even riding in the mountains, I didn't notice any problems with that smaller rotor. This is a light bike. You know, this is not a bike that's built for touring, so you're not gonna have this like loaded down with racks and panniers. So the 140 rotor in the back is fine. And it's also nice actually having a smaller rotor like in a cyclocross race so you don't lock up the rear wheel. And if you're riding in slippery mud, it's a fine spec. If it was a gravel bike, I would expect a 160, but for a cross bike, I would say the 140 is just fine. This is the first Giant TCX that's used this little wedge here. In the past, I've had the bikes with the wedge up here at the top underneath this little rubber cover. But this one here is easier because it does not fall down inside the seat tube. And that was so annoying. This one, you know, it is a wedge. It took me a minute to figure out how to use it, but you just slide the seat post in, tighten it up to 6 Newton meters. Now, the only thing is, like when you're tightening it, it makes this little popping noise and it almost sounds like you're breaking the carbon, but I use it. This is one component you definitely want to use a torque wrench and don't go over 6 Newton meters. But it's important to go up to 6 because you don't want the seat post to slip when you're doing a cyclocross race and jumping back on the saddle. And speaking of saddles, this Giant stock saddle was great. I usually will change out a saddle. There's only a few saddles I really like. The WTB Silverado is one that I would have normally put on, but I actually really like this saddle and I kept it on. I even did like a 4-hour ride on this saddle on a pretty bumpy gravel event and it did fine. I also like this Giant Defuse seat post. So you can see it's got a flat back here, and what that does, it allows the seat post to flex slightly, so it makes this particular seat post a bit more comfortable when you're on a rough road. In addition to tire clearance making this bike more versatile, I also really like the fact that you can put on 2 water bottle cages, which is really important for longer gravel rides. So, you know, it goes back to this bike being versatile, not only for cross, but also for gravel. Like I said in another video, don't ride off a cyclocross bike like this for gravel because they make really good gravel bikes. What I really like about this bike too is just how clean it is. So you've got the 1x system, you've got the cables that route inside the frame. You don't have any bosses and whatnot for racks and fenders. It's a pretty simple bike. I mean, it's not going to be a great touring bike because of the fact that you cannot put a rack on it. Well, there are a lot of racks coming out today that you can mount into the frame. I don't want to really write that off for that, but it doesn't have the braze-ons to just bolt on a rack. But again, I really love the simplicity of this bike. The seat posts, the way it's designed, being down inside there with the kind of that little wedge. Everything on this bike is just nice and clean and simple. I don't mind the 1x drivetrain because of the fact that the gearing is pretty tight for a 1x system. But yeah, it's just a clean bike. I would say my only complaint on this bike, and it's fairly minor because it only happens when you have to change out the rear derailleur cable, is it's not a continuous housing. I really feel like Giant should have made continuous housing. The housing does stop and then it picks back up down here. So you do have to fish a wire through the frame if you were to ever change out the derailleur cable, but not a big deal. Some of you just take your bike to the bike shop and it's their issue. But for those of us who work on our own bikes, it's a pain to fish a cable through a bike, but it is what it is. That's probably really my only complaint about this bike. Even though this bike comes with alloy wheels at this price point, I actually really like these wheels. There have been some alloy wheels that I've ridden that have been fairly flexible in a bad way. Flexible side to side, which reduces the precision of the steering. But the alloy wheels they're comfortable, they're not too harsh over bumps, they're pretty stiff. So yeah, these Giant PX2 rims have proved to be a really nice wheel set. So that's my review of the Giant TCX Advanced Pro 2. And I would say of all the TCX models in their lineup, this is the best value. And I ride some pretty high-end bikes, and I did not find myself lacking anything on this bike. The GRX is amazing, the frame's amazing, the wheel set. Usually on the higher end models, you'll get a carbon wheel set, which I like carbon, but man, I was really impressed with this wheel set. So honestly, even if I had like an extra $2,000 to spend, I don't think I'd do it. I think this bike has everything that you need. So kudos to Giant. Now, like I said, I've been riding Giant TCXs for a long time. The frames really haven't changed, but that's okay because this is a really good carbon frame. The geometry is stable, it's agile, it's responsive, and I really like the versatility with the 2 water bottle cages, the ability to put on bigger tires. Whether you're looking for a cyclocross race bike or you're looking for a fast gravel bike or you're looking for a bike that could be a road bike, so you could put on maybe some 30 or say 28C tires, have it be a really good road bike, and then put on some 40C tires for gravel. This could be like one of the most versatile bikes. It even did great on single track. A really fun single track bike if you want to really improve your handling skills on trails. If you're a mountain biker, riding a bike like this can really help your handling skills. Don't do gnarly trails on this bike. You'd be in way over your head, but on more tame single track, it's a blast. So probably one of the most versatile bikes that's been in my fleet. Oh, the other complaint that I've noticed, I forgot when I was talking about the wheels, I have a hard time getting these tires to hold air overnight. They'll drop probably 5 PSI overnight. So I don't know why. I've checked the valve stems. I've got sealant in there. That's my only other complaint about this bike. So that's going to wrap it up for my review of this Giant TCX. If you've used one, if you have any questions, drop those in the comments below. I would love to hear your thoughts on this bike if you've ridden one, or especially if you own one. Let me know if you agree with some of the things that I said. If I left anything out, let me know. I'll try to answer it in the comments. I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.